A single decision made in Washington could change the price of thousands of products sold across North America. President Donald Trump has announced new 50% tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods, reigniting a trade dispute between two of the world's closest partners. Supporters argue that tariffs will protect American industries and strengthen domestic manufacturing. Critics warn they could make everyday goods more expensive for millions of consumers. But before deciding who's right, there's a much more important question. What exactly is a tariff? Every time tariffs appear in the news, the same questions follow. Will prices go up? Will American jobs be protected? Why is the United States targeting Canada? And if these tariffs are aimed at another country, who actually pays for them? The answers are often very different from what the headlines suggest. At Financial Cycles, we don't simply report today's headlines. We research the facts and explain the economic forces behind every major story. Because once you understand how the system works, today's headlines become much easier to understand. Many people imagine that a tariff is money one country pays to another. It sounds logical. But that isn't how tariffs actually work. In reality, everything begins at the border. The moment a product enters a country, a chain of economic decisions begins. A single government policy can influence manufacturers, shipping companies, retail stores, and eventually, the price you pay at the checkout counter. So, in this documentary, we'll answer the questions that matter. What is a tariff? Why is the U.S. imposing new tariffs on Canada? What is the Trump administration trying to achieve? Why is Canada responding so strongly? Do tariffs actually work? And perhaps the biggest question of all, who really pays for a tariff? Let's begin.
To understand why these new tariffs matter, we first need to understand what a tariff actually is. Simply put, a tariff is a tax placed on imported goods. If a Canadian company wants to sell its products in the United States, those products must first cross the border. And when they do, the U.S. government can require a tariff to be paid before those goods enter the American market. But here's where many people get confused. The tariff isn't usually paid by the Canadian exporter. It's typically paid by the American importer when the goods enter the United States. Imagine an American company importing $10,000 worth of furniture from Canada. If a 50% tariff applies, the importer may now have to pay an additional $5,000 before that shipment can enter the country. Suddenly, that same shipment costs $15,000 instead of $10,000. Now the importer faces an important decision. Should the company accept lower profits? Should it ask the Canadian supplier to lower its price? Should it increase the price charged to retailers? Or should those higher costs eventually be passed on to customers? In reality, the answer is often a combination of all four. That's why economists rarely say that only one side pays for a tariff. The cost can be shared between foreign exporters, importing businesses, workers, and consumers. And that's also why tariffs remain one of the most debated tools in international trade. Supporters argue they encourage companies to manufacture more products at home. Critics argue they increase costs throughout the supply chain and eventually make everyday goods more expensive. Both sides are focusing on different parts of the same economic process, and that's exactly what makes tariffs so difficult to understand. Because unlike a typical tax, their effects don't stop at the border. They continue moving through the economy. One business, one shipment, and one purchase at a time.
Now that we understand how tariffs work, the next question is obvious. Why would the United States impose them in the first place? After all, Canada is one of America's closest allies. The two countries share one of the largest trading relationships in the world. Billions of dollars worth of goods cross the border every day. Because the two economies are so closely connected, changes have immediate effects. Trade policy shifts impact businesses and consumers in both countries. That's one reason tariffs on Canadian goods receive so much attention. Canada supplies the United States with everything from energy and metals to automobiles, lumber, agricultural products, and industrial components. For many American businesses, Canada isn't just a trading partner. It's an essential part of their supply chain. So why introduce tariffs against such an important partner? The answer lies in what the U.S. government hopes tariffs can achieve. President Trump has argued that tariffs can help protect American industries from foreign competition. The idea is quite straightforward. If imported products become more expensive, American-made alternatives may become more attractive to consumers and businesses. Supporters argue that, over time, this could increase domestic production, create manufacturing jobs, and reduce dependence on foreign suppliers. The administration has also argued that tariffs give the United States greater leverage during trade negotiations. By making access to the American market more expensive, the government hopes other countries will be more willing to negotiate new trade agreements. Critics, however, see the situation differently. They argue that while tariffs may protect some industries, they can also raise costs for others. Businesses that rely on imported materials face higher costs, and these expenses can eventually spread throughout the entire economy. Whether tariffs ultimately help or hurt depends on how businesses respond, how consumers react, and how other countries choose to respond. And that's exactly what happened next. Canada didn't simply accept the tariffs, it responded with measures of its own. Trade disputes rarely end with just one country's decision. When one government introduces tariffs, the other often responds with tariffs of its own. That's exactly what happened after the United States announced its new measures against Canadian goods. The Canadian government argued that the tariffs were unfair and promised to respond. In international trade, this type of response is known as retaliation. Instead of accepting higher costs without taking action, a country may impose tariffs on goods imported from the country that acted first. The goal is usually not to collect more tax revenue. It's to create economic pressure. By making exports more expensive, a government hopes businesses in the other country will feel the impact and push for changes to trade policy. But retaliation creates a new problem. Instead of one country's businesses facing higher costs, companies on both sides of the border can now be affected. Canadian importers may pay more for American goods. American importers may continue paying more for Canadian goods. Manufacturers that depend on products crossing the border may see their production costs increase. And consumers in both countries may eventually face higher prices. This is one reason trade disputes can become difficult to resolve. Each new tariff can trigger another response, creating a cycle that affects businesses, workers, and consumers in both economies. Supporters argue that standing firm is sometimes necessary to protect national interests. Critics argue that prolonged trade disputes often leave both sides paying a price. So if businesses, workers, and consumers can all be affected, who ultimately bears the biggest cost? That's the question economists have debated for decades. By now, we've seen why tariffs are introduced, how they work, and why countries often respond with tariffs of its own. But one question still remains: who actually pays for a tariff? The answer is more complicated than many people expect. Technically, the tariff is paid by the importer when the goods enter the country, but economically, that's rarely where the story ends. Businesses don't simply absorb every additional cost. Instead, they look for ways to reduce its impact. Some negotiate lower prices with foreign suppliers. Some accept smaller profit margins. Some look for alternative suppliers in other countries. And many pass at least part of the extra cost onto their customers. That means the final cost of a tariff is often shared. Foreign exporters may earn less. Importing businesses may make smaller profits. Workers may face slower hiring or reduced investment. And consumers may end up paying higher prices. Exactly how those costs are divided depends on the product and the industry. That's why economists often say there is no single winner or loser. Every tariff creates a chain of economic adjustments. Some industries may benefit from reduced foreign competition, others may struggle with higher costs, and consumers may notice the effects through the prices they pay. So when people ask, who pays for a tariff? The most accurate answer is surprisingly simple. Everyone pays, just not equally. The debate over tariffs is unlikely to end anytime soon. Governments will continue using them. Businesses will continue adapting to them. Supporters see tariffs as a way to protect domestic industries, strengthen national security, and encourage investment at home. Critics argue they increase costs, disrupt supply chains, and make everyday goods more expensive. Both perspectives highlight real economic consequences. So, do tariffs actually work? The answer depends on what they're designed to achieve. They may help protect certain industries or encourage more domestic production. But they can also increase costs and reduce trade. That's why the question isn't simply whether tariffs are bad or good. The more important question is who benefits and who bears the costs. Today's headlines may focus on one announcement or one leader, but the economic principles behind them remain largely the same. Thank you for watching Financial Cycles. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more economic stories, consider subscribing. And we'll see you in the next one.